Hi, welcome to the Georgia Department of Education Orchestra Community. I'm your community moderator, Sean Horton. And so for this series of webinars, we're going to be talking about the great beyond. It's managing all the other stuff that comes with our programs. We're going to talk a little bit about writing recommendation letters, managing after-school clubs and activities, and finally, we're going to wrap up with dealing with seating and seating charts and all that fun stuff. So we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to first talk a little bit about recommendations and writing recommendation letters for students and some strategies that I've found to be helpful. So for recommendation letters, especially as high school teachers, but even as middle school teachers, we're often asked by students to write recommendations for summer programs or even for college or scholarship opportunities. So I think it's a really good idea if you can have a procedure in place, either a Google form, a sign-up sheet, a paper form, whatever is most convenient for you. But having some kind of procedure ready to go so that it's easier for you to keep track of and also so that students know what the procedure is, and that keeps it really easy to keep up with. If you have a student who asks you for a recommendation and it's not a student that you feel comfortable writing a recommendation for because maybe you don't know them very well, or maybe they're not the type of student that you could feel like you could write a nice recommendation for, go ahead and just be honest with the student. The best thing we can do as teachers is lead with honesty, and we can do it kindly, but I think it's important that if you don't feel like you can do that for a student, to go ahead and let them know that you don't feel comfortable doing this recommendation and you would recommend that they ask a different teacher. If you're writing a recommendation letter, especially if it's for a college opportunity or a scholarship, I would ask them for a senior profile or resume. Different schools do different things. Our students do a senior profile that they do already for the counseling office. So I'll ask my students for that, but either some kind of resume or activity list, something that will help let you know what they're involved in so that you have an idea about what to write. So go ahead and have the student submit to you either through your Google form, your sign-up sheet, or your paper form who the recommendation goes to. If it's an online form or if it's a sealed letter, do you need to sign the back of the envelope? When is it due? And then any other important information that you may need to complete the letter. And then I think it's really helpful if you're going to write a recommendation letter for the student. Most of the time, online forms or Common App, the students will waive their right to see the recommendation. But I think it's a really nice thing we can do for students that if we're going to feel comfortable writing them a recommendation, that we also provide them with a copy for their records. I think it's just a nice thing for them to have. And also, then they know that you're done with it. So when you're writing a recommendation letter, usually most of them start with a generic to whom it may concern, unless they've given you a very specific person to write to. I think that's a pretty good start. In your first paragraph of your recommendation letter, please introduce the student and use their full name the first time, because oftentimes many of our students go by other names or they will use a nickname, but it's really helpful if the person reading the recommendation letter knows for sure that you're talking about the same student. Make sure you tell and how long you've known the student and then what capacity you know the student. Maybe this is your private student, maybe it's your orchestra student, but how long have you had the time have you had working with the student and in what capacity? And then in your body paragraphs, you can include as many body paragraphs or as few as you want, but you want to have some details about the student. And talking with some different college admissions offices over the years, what I found is that they want to know personal experiences about the student. What's something about the student? If you could tell me a story about them, that would be interesting or set them apart. Or, is there something that really sets the student apart characteristically? Are they very helpful? And can you give an example? So anytime that you can provide information about a student's character and then follow that up with an example, I think is really important. Obviously, any information that you can provide that wouldn't come out in an application. So generally, students submit in their application what coursework they've taken. They submit what different clubs and activities they're involved in. But maybe in their applications, they don't submit, when I was a ninth grader, I was, really in the lowest level of a concert orchestra, beginning orchestra, and then I've worked my way up to the top orchestra. So, this is where you can help them fill in the gaps and tell a little bit more about their story. If the student has overcome certain obstacles that they're okay with you sharing, like, for example, maybe the student had some learning difficulties, or maybe the student came in and was behind and then, really worked hard to catch up, or maybe this student is a really overachiever, but music didn't come easy, and so they worked really hard in your class. But sharing details about the student that that will really help create a full picture of this student. And you can do that in the body paragraphs. I like to talk a lot about what I know about the student, especially if they've been a leader in my program, and give an example of some things that they've taken leadership in. You can tell about some of their musical accomplishments if you feel like that'll be appropriate. Again, anything that you're not going to see in the regular student application, I think would be really helpful for an admissions office or a scholarship committee to see. And then finally, in your closing, go ahead and summarize their strengths. And you really should conclude with like a direct recommendation, like I recommend without reservation, or I highly recommend, and I would go ahead and use the student's full name again. And then if it's not a common app or a general recommendation letter, go ahead and use the college name or the scholarship name or the activity name of what you're recommending them for. So I highly recommend this person for the scholarship at this university. So go ahead and make it sound very official. And then finally, you're going to close it out. Make sure you sign it, and not only electronically, but physically sign it. And you want to make sure you include your title and any contact information, so that if they have a question or they want to follow up with more information about a student, then they can get in touch with you. So, any kind of specific examples of a student's ability, I think, are really helpful. Clearly, you don't want to exaggerate, like, oh, this is the best student in the whole wide world, and this student has like a 2.0. Maybe they're not the best academic student at that point. Or, overly vague, like nice, polite. But if you can include statistics, like this student is in the top 5% of students I've ever worked with, or this student's writing abilities is the top 1%. Some type of statistic, or if you want to talk about their GPA, obviously their GPA is included in their regular application, but if you feel like that's going to reinforce your point. And then you want to really proofread carefully. As we're writing as educators, sometimes we're writing very quickly and we're in a hurry. Oftentimes, I'm going through a recommendation really fast and I'm trying to type and I'm doing 10 other things. So please proofread carefully. Make sure you've spelled the student's name right. Make sure you've included the correct information. And then use a school letterhead, or if you have your own letterhead for your orchestra program, but put the letter on letterhead. Again, it just creates that official look. One of the things that I think is really helpful is you can kind of create a basic template. You're not going to use the same letter for every kid, but you can kind of start plugging in details about kids. So, obviously the first paragraph, you can swap out their name and how long you've known them and what orchestra they're in, things like that. And then you can change around the body, and then the closing paragraph, you can, fill in details. So you can sort of create a recommendation template. I've done this and I find it very helpful, especially around September and October when the recommendation letters become very, very highly requested and suddenly they're needing them very quickly. So if you can come up sort of like a template that you can drop in some information pretty quickly and then go back and fill in the body, that might be a helpful starting point, and already have it set on the letterhead. So this is an example of a letter of recommendation request form. I think this is really helpful. You can do this as a Google form, or you can do this as like a paper form, but I would recommend that anytime students want to request a recommendation, that you ask for at least a couple week lead time, because again, if they're asking you the night before it's due, that's pretty hard. We've definitely had kids do this. I'll never forget, we were getting ready to perform at GMEA one evening in Savannah many years ago. And our performance was at, I think at 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, very late performance time. And we got on the bus to go back to the hotel after the performance, and a student needed a letter done that night. And so we all have these wonderful, lovely students who are still students and sometimes don't think through timelines. So this is really helpful if you go ahead and tell them, look, I need 2 weeks every time before the deadline. So have them enter their information, phone number. That way, if you need to get in touch with them over the weekend, if something comes up and you need more information, when is this letter due? What is it for? Is it for just general college admission? Is this for scholarship? Is it for some sort of summer opportunity? There's so many different things now that kids ask for recommendations for. Okay, and then I would have them select the option below. use the form that I'm providing for you. So if this is like a standard form that you're just completing instead of a letter, or if they're going to send you an email link to complete, like for a Common App, or please write a generic letter I may use again, or write a letter addressed to the following. So have them check an option below. Any other information that you feel like you need to know, and then have them attach their senior profile. This way you know exactly where it needs to go, who it needs to go to, and it's very clear. This is really helpful, I think, because so often, kids have emailed me about letters and it's hard to keep up with. But if I have this sheet on top, I know exactly who it goes to, when it's due, and I can organize them in a folder and do that. Now, if you're really someone that prefers it electronically, a Google form is great. You can even have a QR code, and then they can just attach their senior profile or their senior resume or whatever level you're teaching. So I think this is really helpful to have some sort of form that students can fill out. So those are kind of some ideas about when you're writing student recommendations.